I never thought my career would end next to a plastic Christmas tree. Not after everything I'd built for that company. Not after the late nights, the sprints, the weekends I traded for deadlines that weren't even mine. But sometimes people don't stab you in the back quietly. Sometimes they do it under fairy lights, with a microphone in their hand. The Christmas party was supposed to be a formality, a corporate ritual, awkward small talk, dry chicken, managers pretending they cared. I showed up because my team insisted. You deserve to be there, they said. The project wouldn't exist without you. They weren't wrong. For 2 years, I lived and breathed that platform. It wasn't a product. It was a system built on warnings nobody wanted to hear. That night, the office looked unreal. Garlands across the door frames, speakers blasting the same 5 holiday songs, people clutching cheap wine in plastic cups. It felt harmless, tired, predictable. My boss, Mark, made his entrance the way he always did. Too loud, too confident. Already 2 drinks passed where his judgment usually started to slip. He'd been treating the project like his golden ticket all year. Ever since upper management started asking, who's leading this? He'd been rehearsing the answer in every meeting. Spoiler, it wasn't me. When he tapped his fork against the side of a champagne glass, everyone groaned. Mark loved the spotlight too much to pass it up. Usually his speeches were the same. Corporate cliches wrapped in humor that never landed. I half expected another joke about being a family. But then he said my name. At first I thought he was going to thank me, or at least pretend to. That's the game. Managers get credit, engineers get applause. I walked toward the little stage area, adjusting the collar of a sweater my ex-wife used to call my only festive thing. He put a hand on my shoulder like we were old friends. Tonight, he said, we're making a change. People chuckled. Someone shouted, promotion? I forced a smile, even though I felt something cold forming in my stomach. Mark continued, still smiling like he was hosting an awards show. As of today, the company is moving in a different direction. And unfortunately, that means parting ways with certain roles that no longer align with next year's objectives. It took the room a moment to process what he'd said. It took me about half a second. I felt more eyes on me than in any meeting I'd ever attended. Then laughter. Light at first, confused. People thought it was a bit, a prank, a holiday joke. Even I did, for a heartbeat. Until Mark held out a white envelope. Printed, sealed, official. That was the moment the music kept playing. But everything else stopped. He wasn't joking. I didn't reach for the envelope. Someone from HR, pale, avoiding my eyes, stepped forward and gently placed it on the edge of the table beside me. My badge vibrated in my pocket. The access deactivation went through. In full view of 200 people, next to a stack of gingerbread cookies, they fired me. I didn't make a scene. I didn't even breathe for a moment. My boss kept talking, pivoting back to his jokes, easing the tension like he hadn't just ripped my career out by the roots. I looked at the monitors around the room. The slideshow was still showing screenshots of the project I'd built. My work, my code, my warnings underneath every milestone. The same warnings Mark had always dismissed. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wish anyone Merry Christmas. I walked out into the cold night air, with the envelope still unopened in my hand, the music echoing behind me like a bad memory. What I didn't know as I crossed the parking lot was that within 3 months, everything that happened inside that party would come back to them, loudly, publicly, and far worse than anything they imagined, and I wouldn't have to lift a finger. The official email from HR arrived at 11:47 p.m., not even an hour after the party ended. Cold, formulaic, 2 paragraphs in a PDF attachment labeled Separation Agreement, Draft. The subject line didn't even include my name, just action required. They didn't fire me during the party by accident. They timed it. They wanted witnesses, noise, alcohol, a distraction big enough to drown out any sympathy I might have earned. And then, when it got quiet again, they hit send on the paperwork. like they were filing an end-of-year invoice. I stared at the screen for a long minute. My apartment felt too quiet. No holiday decorations, no warmth, just the glow of my monitor, reflecting off the envelope I still hadn't opened. Cost optimization. That was the phrase they used. HR slapped it right into the third line as if it could justify everything. The public humiliation, the timing, the way they stripped my access while people were still drinking near my desk. But everyone in the office knew the real reason. Mark wanted a win he could take full credit for, and I was the one thing standing between him and his visionary leader narrative. Over the next 48 hours, the shock turned into something sharper. Irritation, anger that kept me awake at night. But beneath all of it was clarity, a painful, unforgiving kind. They didn't just fire me, they amputated the person who held the project together, and they didn't even realize what else I'd walked out with. Not documents stolen or copied illegally, nothing they could accuse me of, just versions, notes, drafts. The original emails, including the ones where I warned them, repeatedly, that pushing the timeline and cutting the QA budget would create a structural risk that wouldn't show up until late-stage deployment. Every time I'd written, "This will break under load," Mark responded with the same line. "Don't overthink, we'll fix it live." For 2 years, he treated engineering the way some people treat loose screws. Ignore them until something falls apart. The problem was, I'd been the person tightening everything behind him. But now, I wasn't there anymore. On the third day after the firing, I started getting messages from coworkers. Quiet ones, sent from personal phones. "I'm so sorry. This is messed up. We didn't know he'd do that publicly." And one from someone who'd always been honest with me. "He wants the VP role. He thinks the project will sell itself." That one made me laugh. Humorless, tired, but real. The project didn't sell itself. I carried it. I patched it. I built the parts Mark bragged about. I covered for deadlines he negotiated without understanding the tech behind them. Still, I didn't plan any revenge. I didn't fantasize about blowing things up or getting back at anyone. I wasn't that guy. I just didn't want to disappear quietly and let them rewrite history. So I did the only rational thing. I started documenting my side of the story for myself. A timeline, a clean snapshot. Not to send, not to threaten, just to preserve what actually happened. The turning point came a week later. I was at the grocery store late at night, hoodie on, phone nearly dead, trying to act like a normal person buying cereal and frozen meals when a notification popped up. It was from the system I'd built, a status alert. Not failure, not warning, just instability. The kind you only see when someone starts changing things they don't understand. In any other situation, I would have responded out of instinct. But this time, I just stood there between shelves of canned soup and holiday decorations and felt something shift inside me. I wasn't their safety net anymore. If they were going to push the system past its limits, they'd have to live with the consequences. I walked home slowly, the night colder than it needed to be, the alert still glowing on my lock screen. I didn't know it yet, but what was happening inside that system, the quiet tremors, the ignored warnings, the patchwork fixes, would become the fault line that changed everything. And for the first time since the firing, I didn't feel powerless. I felt patient. The first week after the firing felt like someone hit mute on my entire life. No Slack pings, no morning stand-ups, no late-night messages from Mark asking, "Can you hop on a quick call?" Which always meant 2 hours of me fixing something he promised wouldn't break. For the first time in years, my days were empty. Quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. More like the silence left behind after a building collapses. I tried to distract myself, clean the apartment, sort old boxes, pretend I had some kind of routine. But everywhere I looked, pieces of that project stared back at me. Notebooks full of sketches, mock-ups taped to the wall, printed risk logs with red circles around the things nobody took seriously. On day 4, I found something I hadn't seen in months, the original risk assessment I had written during the planning stage, the same one Mark dismissed in front of the team. Not verbally. He never attacked directly. He just made a small joke to lighten the mood. Worst-case scenarios are for people who don't trust their own work. But I remembered his handwriting in the margin, a quick note in thick black ink. "We'll fix it live." Back then I took it as confidence. Now it read like a warning I ignored. I sat at my desk, the paper in my hands, and realized something that made my stomach twist. I had spent 2 years protecting people who treated caution like an inconvenience. People who saw preparedness as negativity. People whose success depended on someone like me patching their shortcuts. And the moment they felt secure enough, they cut me loose. It wasn't the firing that broke me. It was the realization that I'd been complicit. I built the safety nets. I covered the cracks. I made it possible for Mark to pretend he was leading anything at all. That night, I finally opened the envelope he handed me at the party. Inside was a single-page statement, ending my employment, effective immediately, a severance offer that didn't even meet industry minimums, and an NDA so broad it practically banned me from speaking about air. I read it 3 times, then I put it away. Not out of fear, but because for the first time since the party, I understood something I should have realized years ago. They thought they were done with me. But they had no idea how much of that project depended on decisions I made quietly, carefully, deliberately. Decisions documented through months of version history they barely understood. The next morning, while making coffee, I opened the system dashboard again. The instability alert had expanded. A new warning flashed. Load discrepancy in a module that had been solid for 18 months. The kind of issue that didn't happen naturally. The kind that showed up when someone without context tried to optimize something that was never supposed to be touched. I leaned back in my chair, watching the numbers shift. If I were still there, I would have fixed it. Immediately. Automatically. Even at 3 a.m. Because back then I cared more about preventing disasters than letting people face the consequences of ignoring me. But now, it wasn't my disaster anymore. 3 days later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Lena, one of the only project managers who ever listened when I brought up risks. "Hey," she wrote, "something's off with the system. People are nervous. Did you get any alerts on your end before they cut your access?" I stared at the message for a long time. She wasn't asking for gossip. She wanted answers because she genuinely cared about the quality of the work, not politics. So I told her the truth, without bitterness. There were warnings. They weren't addressed. She didn't respond for 10 minutes. When she did, it was short, almost resigned. That explains a lot. The next message came a minute later. They're making changes. Fast ones. And Mark's saying it'll be fine. I could picture it perfectly. The rushed meetings, the Band-Aid fixes, the pressure to hit the quarter-end demonstration. I had lived through that cycle too many times. Except this time, I wasn't there to absorb the damage. That night, while I lay awake staring at my ceiling, the realization hit me like a slow-moving train. I never wanted revenge. I just wanted to stop feeling responsible for people who treated responsibility like a burden. And for the first time since the Christmas party, I felt something close to release. Not peace, not yet, but the beginnings of it. What I didn't know was that the instability inside the system was growing quietly, steadily, like a crack deep inside a wall, hidden until the exact moment everything built on top of it starts to slide. And when it finally did, it wouldn't break in silence. 3 months after the Christmas party, I'd almost learned how to live without the constant noise of the office. Almost. I was at my sister's place helping her assemble a bookshelf, the kind with instructions that look like an IKEA joke someone forgot to finish. When my phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. 3 messages, all from people who rarely reached out, unless something had gone wrong. "Have you seen the client portal? It's down. They're in emergency mode." I froze with a screwdriver in my hand. The The portal wasn't supposed to fail. Not catastrophically, not without warning. The only way it could crash this early in the quarter was if someone had rewritten the module I'd built to handle the load distribution. The one I had repeatedly insisted should never be touched without a full regression cycle. I opened the public-facing status page, read across the board, full outage. My sister asked, "Everything okay?" I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to hide anything, but because I didn't know how to explain that the disaster unfolding on my phone was something I had predicted in detail, over and over, in writing. Within minutes, the messages escalated. They can't roll back. The backup failed. Client is furious. That last one wasn't surprising. The portal was used by the company's largest account, the one Mark kept bragging about during meetings, calling it our crown jewel. If the client couldn't access their dashboards during reporting week, the fallout would be immediate and severe. I sat down on the floor and finally texted Lena. "What happened?" she called. Not texted, called. Which she only did when things were past the point of control. Her voice was tight, rushed, layered with panic she was trying and failing to hide. "They changed your load balancing logic," she said. Mark wanted it more efficient. He pushed an update without a full QA cycle. Then the patch broke something deeper. Now everything's unraveling. I closed my eyes. Of course he did. Of course he went straight for the one part of the system that looked simple but wasn't. The one built on calculations that only worked because of how the rest of the architecture compensated for them. "What about the audit logs?" I asked. Silence. Then, "They're being requested. External team. Third-party consultants." I felt a slow exhale leave my chest. Not satisfaction, just inevitability. The system wasn't failing because I'd left. It was failing because they had ignored everything that kept it standing. An hour later, I received an email. Not from the company. From a consulting firm I recognized. One that specialized in post-incident analysis. "Hello. We're reviewing the system's original architecture. We see your name attached to several components. Would you be available for a brief clarification call? Your perspective could help us understand the intended design." They weren't asking for gossip. They weren't dragging me into office politics. They wanted technical clarity. Because the people now running the system couldn't explain why it collapsed. This was the part where, in a worse story, the protagonist sends a revenge package, leaks documents, or tries to burn everything down. But I didn't need to. I didn't want to. I joined the call. It lasted 10 minutes. They asked direct, neutral questions. What was the purpose of this module? Were these warnings documented? Why would this change introduce instability? I answered calmly, factually, without emotion. Everything I said was supported by version history, emails, and documented risk assessments. The same ones I'd written, the same ones Mark had dismissed. When the consultant asked, "Did leadership approve the accelerated timeline?" I didn't speculate. I simply forwarded the email thread where Mark insisted on shipping early to meet strategic goals. No embellishment, no accusation, just evidence. When the call ended, the consultant's tone changed subtly. "Thank you," he said. "This clarifies a lot. Not helps, not adds context. Clarifies. Meaning, the problem wasn't an accident. It was a decision." 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. Lena. "They're tearing apart the timeline," she said. "Everything you warned about is in the report. Senior leadership is furious." I heard voices in the background. Rushed, anxious, clipped. The sound of a department in freefall. "What about Mark?" I asked. Another pause. "He's not talking much." Translation. The man who loved microphones suddenly couldn't speak. That evening, I refreshed the company's status page one more time. The portal was still down. The incident counter had rolled past 6 hours. The client posted a public notice of service interruption, something they'd never done before, and tagged the company. By midnight, the numbers were clear. Quarter-end reporting was ruined. Revenue projections shattered. The crown jewel account was already hinting at evaluation of partnership, and I hadn't lifted a finger. My only contribution was telling the truth when someone finally bothered to ask for it. As I sat in the dim light of my apartment, watching the red outage banner, I realized something I hadn't felt in months. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability, finally catching up to people who thought they were untouchable. And they were only beginning to feel it. What came next? The fallout inside the company, the consequences no one could dodge, would reshape everything for them and for me. The outage lasted 9 hours. 9 hours of chaos, silence, and scrambling. One of those corporate disasters that look small on the outside but tear entire departments apart from within. By the next morning, everyone in the industry knew. The client released a formal statement. Not dramatic, not emotional, just a cold corporate paragraph announcing they were reevaluating their long-term partnership due to system instability and leadership oversights. That last phrase, leadership oversights, was a kill shot. Everyone knew exactly who it referred to. I didn't celebrate. I didn't open champagne. I didn't dance on the ruins of a company I had once given years of my life to. I just made breakfast, sat by the window of my small apartment, and watched the light come in over the buildings. It was the calmest I had felt in months. Around noon, Lena called again. She didn't bother with small talk. It happened, she said. What? They let Mark go. Mutual separation. You know what that means. It meant they escorted him out quietly with a neutral internal memo and a legal settlement big enough to shut him up. They never say the real words. You failed. You ignored warnings. You caused the company millions. Companies prefer clean adjectives and vague phrases, but the truth always leaks in the details. What about the project? I asked, a deep sigh. It's classified as a full quarter loss. They won't recover the client. Too much trust broken. Of course it was. You can fix bugs. You can't fix reputations. And the team? I asked. People are shaken, but honestly, most are relieved he's gone. I nodded to myself. Some things don't need justice. They just need the right truth to surface. Later that afternoon, I received another unexpected email, this time from the same consulting firm I'd helped during the investigation. Subject: opportunity to discuss. They wanted to know if I was open to working with them, not full-time, not immediately, but as a technical advisor on systems architecture. Nothing flashy, nothing political. Just the kind of work I always wanted to do in peace, without someone like Mark rewriting my decisions to look like his ideas. I stared at the email longer than I expected, not out of disbelief, but because the timing made sense. When people finally understand what you're worth, it's rarely when you're shouting. It's when you're gone. That evening, while walking to the store, I passed by a downtown office tower. For a moment, I pictured my old company's floor, the dim lights, the exhausted faces, the rushed stand-ups, the quiet panic that always lived under the surface. And then I felt something surprising. Relief, not spite, not triumph, just relief. Because for the first time, I realized I didn't want them back. Not the job, not the building, not the stress of protecting people who refuse to protect themselves. I wanted something different, a life where my work didn't depend on someone else's ego. When I got home, Lena sent one final message. You were right, about everything. I typed a response, deleted it, then typed another one. Take care of yourself, I wrote, and don't let anyone push you into fixing their mistakes. She sent back a simple heart emoji, something she rarely used, a quiet acknowledgement that we had both lived through the same storm, just from different angles. That night, I sat at my desk, reopened the system dashboard out of habit, then closed it again. It wasn't mine anymore. Its problems weren't mine. Its collapse wasn't my burden to carry. Instead, I opened a blank document and started sketching out ideas. Not for them, not for any company, but for myself. Something I hadn't done in years. A new architecture, a cleaner solution, something I could build on my terms. By midnight, the outline was done. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and felt something I hadn't felt since before the Christmas party. A future that wasn't tied to anyone else's mistakes. Mark lost his job. The project collapsed. The truth came out without me pushing it, and I walked away with my integrity, my clarity, and an opportunity that wasn't built on someone else's shortcuts. People think revenge is fire, loud, destructive, consuming, but sometimes it's something simpler. A quiet morning, a clear head, and the undeniable knowledge that you survived what destroyed them. That was the real ending, and for the first time in a long time, it was enough.